Okay, we are diving deep today into a topic that, it forces us to question a really foundational assumption.
A huge one.
What does it actually mean to have a mind?
For centuries, the answer has been pretty simple, right? It's the human brain, end of story. We just assume that consciousness, learning, it's all some kind of uniquely human jumpstart.
And that's exactly the challenge our sources are laying down. They explore this idea that the mind isn't a wall separating us from the rest of life.
Right, it's more of a continuous spectrum that runs through everything that's alive.
So our mission today is to see if we're being, well, a little arrogant.
Yeah, and dismissing things like worms or jellyfish or even plants as just unconscious biological machines.
Exactly. I mean, if a creature can sense, if it can learn from experience and change its behavior, are we wrong to deny it some form of mental life?
We're going to translate some really surprising evidence from biology into some pretty profound principles for self-reflection.
And show you why understanding a sea slug, of all things, can actually help you understand yourself.
And it all starts in a very surprising place, with the humble earthworm.
This is where the history gets so compelling. We always talk about Charles Darwin and Lembamon, The Origin of Species.
Of course.
But his final comprehensive project, the book he spent his last years on, was all about the earthworm.
It's incredible, isn't it? It just speaks to his boundless curiosity. He didn't see a garden pest. He saw Earth's unheralded architects.
And he proved it with hard numbers.
Oh, yeah, hard numbers. Darwin calculated that in healthy soil, worms process over 10 tons of earth.
Like 10 tons.
10 tons per year, per unit area. They are constantly cycling, aerating, bringing new soil up.
Wow.
He basically concluded that over millennia, these tiny organisms have designed the planet's surface. They are global engineers.
But he also wanted to know if they were more than just efficient, dirt machines.
Exactly. He spent years just observing their behaviors, trying to see if there was anything beyond simple chemical reflexes.
So what were the specific observations that made him think the worm was?
Well, thinking. He noted their sensitivities. They are incredibly aware of ground vibrations, so they can instantly hide from a bird, but they're totally deaf to airborne sounds. They avoid light. That's survival instinct, sure. But then he looked at their feeding habits.
And this is where that whole idea of judgment comes into play.
Precisely. When a worm pulls something, like a leaf, into its burrow to eat, it has to orient it correctly to fit down the hole.
Okay.
If they're dragging a pine needle, they grab the wide end first. A triangle of paper, they grab the pointy end first.
Now, hold on. Couldn't that just be mechanical? The simple physics of pulling the easiest angle.
Yeah.
How did he argue against that?
Well, he argued that for the worm to consistently choose the most efficient, narrowest point, it requires some kind of sensory evaluation and selection. He concluded they must have, and this is his quote, some concept of the general shape of the object to pull it off. It's decision-making. It's trial and error.
And that's a huge mental leap. That decision, that recognition of shape. That's what led him to say that worms deserve to be called intelligent.
Because they act, as he put it, almost like humans in similar circumstances. The building blocks of mind start right there in the dirt.
And if that level of intelligence is in a worm, we have to start looking for that continuity across the whole biological spectrum.
Which brings us to creatures we often dismiss as just mindless blobs, like the jellyfish.
Specifically, the box jellyfish.
Yeah.
It's a huge challenge to our assumption that you need a central brain for complex tasks.
It is. I mean, it has a simple, decentralized nervous system, but the box jellyfish has structures that are weirdly similar to human eyes.
A retina, a cornea.
A retina, a cornea, and a lens. It doesn't just sense light. It uses these eyes to navigate complex mangrove forests to hunt.
So it's not just floating around randomly. It's hunting strategically.
Exactly. Studies show they can learn and form memories about obstacles or prey density, and they adapt their hunting patterns. Nature found a way to create learned strategies even without the big, centralized computer we call a brain.
And then if we look at plants, which operate on an even slower timescale, the line gets even blurrier. We say, like a vegetable, to mean doing nothing.
But they are constantly in motion and communication. Darwin was a pioneer here, too. He showed that plants transmit electrical signals.
Like animal nerves.
Very similar, just much slower. We're talking centimeters per second versus meters per second in animals.
So tell me more about that. The mimosa pudicat, the touch-me-not plant. How is that related to our own nervous system?
That folding action is triggered by what's called an action potential.
An action potential.
It's just the plant's version of a nerve impulse. It's a rapid temporary change in the electrical voltage across the cell membrane.
And that's the same basic thing our nerves do.
It's the same basic mechanism our nerves use to fire and send information through the body.
So plants have a kind of nerve communication, and they also have memory.
Absolutely. They remember things like light position or wind through chemical or structural changes. They learn on a seasonal timeline, adapting their growth based on past stress.
Okay, let's go down to the smallest scale. Protists. Single-celled organisms, like an amoeba. This has to be where we draw the line and say, okay, no mind here.
You'd think so. But experiments on these creatures show they exhibit habituation. They don't just have one knee-jerk reflex to something unpleasant. They go through graded steps of avoidance.
And crucially, they learn.
They do. If a stimulus is repeated but causes no harm, they get habituated. They just stop reacting. They've learned it's benign. But if it is harmful, they remember that threat for several minutes and react way faster the next time.
You mentioned an analogy about scale that I think is key here. Can you explain that?
Yeah, it's all about perception. If you took that single-celled amoeba, which can recognize harm, change its behavior, seek comfort, and you magnified it to the size of a dog, you would instantly say it has internal states. You'd see it recoil and call it fear. You'd see it move toward food and call it desire.
We only deny it those feelings because it's microscopic.
Exactly. It's hidden from our experience. It just proves that the building blocks of learning and desire are woven into the very fabric of cellular life.
That's incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
And that foundation, that ability for a simple thing to change and remember, that leads us right to human memory. To understand us, scientists first had to understand the sea slug.
Right. When neuroscience really started digging into memory, they needed a simple model. They chose the sea slug, Aplysia. It only has about 20,000 neurons.
Which is manageable compared to our 86 billion. So what did the sea slug teach us that's so foundational for us?
It revealed the two core mechanisms of how memory gets formed. For short-term memory, it's all about functional changes at the synapses.
Functional changes. What does that actually look like?
Imagine it's like a computer file. Short-term memory is like just temporarily changing the file name or giving it a quick tag. The data is the same, but you're prioritizing it for a moment.
Okay, so that's short term. The big breakthrough was with long-term memory.
Exactly. The researchers found that for the sea slug to store a memory long-term, it required actual structural changes.
Structural. As in the nervous system physically changes its shape.
Yes, literally. The neurons grow new connections or they get rid of old ones. It physically rewires itself.
That's profound. So learning isn't just chemical, it's architectural.
That's a perfect way to put it.
So what's the analogy for that?
Well, if short-term memory is just changing the file name, long-term memory is literally building a new wing on your library.
Yeah.
You are adding new permanent structures to hold that information.
And what's so amazing is that this mechanism, this physical change for long-term memory, is foundational to how you form complex human memories.
You and the sea slug are using the same basic hardware principle.
And this just extends up the chain to other invertebrates we overlook, like bees, which do some pretty complex abstract thinking.
Bees can recognize color, shape. They communicate incredibly complex information with their waggle dance. Some wasps can even recognize individual faces.
A task we thought required a big, complex brain.
And then, of course, there's the octopus, which just blows all the rules out of the water.
It's like an alien intelligence right here on Earth.
It really is. It has 500 million neurons, more than a mouse, and a lot of them are distributed in its arms. It can learn by just watching. It can manipulate objects. It shows complex emotions. It even plays.
It is almost impossible to study an octopus and still think mental life is just a human thing.
It really is.
Okay, so the science is clear. The capacity to record, to learn. The biological definition of a mind. It's continuous. So what does this all mean for us? Let's move from the biology to the philosophy.
Right, the 4 big takeaways. The first one is the most direct. Mind is a continuous spectrum. We didn't just suddenly get a mind. We're just a very complex, high-speed point on a curve that starts with protists and worms. It should, dismantle the human ego a bit.
We didn't switch the system on. We just massively upgraded the operating system.
Exactly. Which leads to the second takeaway. Those primal patterns persist within us. Our high-level thinking is sitting on top of ancient, primitive biological drives.
We're still running on some worm-like avoidance software.
Totally. Think about fear. A worm coils when it senses vibrations. We recoil when we sense criticism. That drive to avoid pain and stick to what's familiar and safe, that is ancient programming.
And we repeat those patterns even when they don't serve us anymore.
Right. We withdraw from a social situation that could be good for us because of that old survival drive.
And this brings us to the third and maybe the most challenging principle, the paradox of higher complexity, self-deception.
This is the big one. Simple life forms are honest. Fear means flee. But humans, we layer language and stories and theories on top of these primal impulses.
So we use our big brains to rationalize our primitive reactions.
We use our incredible intelligence to lie to ourselves about why we're doing something. We use language to dress up the worm's panic.
Give me an example of that.
Okay. So, say you're afraid to start a new business. You don't say, my ancient brain is panicking and wants the safety of the job I hate.
No, of course not.
Instead, you say, I'm just being cautious, or I really like the stability I have now. We use complexity to hide the simple fact that we're controlled by a basic, fear-driven need to flee discomfort.
That is sobering. We're highly sophisticated machines running some very old and often trapping software.
Which brings us to the fourth and maybe the most essential principle, ethical responsibility and humility.
Okay.
If we accept that even these rudimentary life forms have a proto-mind, a capacity to sense and learn, then we have to reevaluate our ethical relationship with the entire living world.
You stop seeing the worm or the plant as just an object or a resource.
Exactly. We're not the masters of the house of life. We're just a very complex and very interdependent layer within it. That continuity demands humility.
And that humility is the launching pad for actually changing ourselves.
It is. Because here's the ultimate contradiction. If simple organisms, sea slugs, worms can adapt, change their reactions, and physically rewire themselves, why do humans, with all our consciousness and language and philosophy, so often say, I can't change, that's just how I am?
We have all the tools, but we feel the most trapped by our own patterns.
So we need to move from just being aware of our mind's function to active wisdom. And we can apply the lessons of the worm and the sea slug to our own lives with 3 simple practices.
All right, give us the action plan. How do we rewire the human brain based on a sea slug?
Practice 1. Observe yourself scientifically.
Meaning take the judgment out of it.
Completely. Stop assigning moral labels like I'm bad for getting angry. Instead, be a scientist studying a worm. Just note the pattern. When my boss criticizes my work, I coil up and get defensive.
Just see the pattern clearly. Neutrally.
Yes. Then, practice 2. Question the limiting pattern. Once you see it clearly, you ask, is this ancient pattern still serving me now? The worm runs from the light to survive the bird. That makes sense. But if you are constantly running from the light of truth, avoiding feedback because of past criticism, that pattern is no longer about survival, it's trapping you.
And finally, the structural change. The new wing on the library.
Practice 3. Choose a small new behavior. Just like the sea slug grows new synapses, we have to intentionally program new pathways through repeated small choices.
It's not about a huge overnight transformation.
Not at all. It's about making one deliberate choice in a moment of stress. A calm reply instead of an explosion. Pausing to breathe before you react. Choosing curiosity over defensiveness.
And that small intentional choice, when you repeat it,
Where?
that's literally building the new pathway. That's the long-term memory of a new, better you.
The human difference isn't in having a mind. All life has that in some form. Our difference is the unique capacity to be aware of and responsible for our mind's function. We can choose to overwrite the ancient software.
We started this deep dive asking where the human mind stands, and we ended up realizing we're just intrinsically connected to the oldest, most basic forms of life that mastered the art of adaptation.
That's it. Knowledge of the external world, the mechanics of a sea slug, Darwin's wisdom about the worm is the clearest path to real internal wisdom and conscious change.
So here's our final thought for you to mull over today. How will you look at a very small creature, an ant, a leaf, a worm after the rain, with different eyes?
Not to, deify them, but just to remind yourself that the mind isn't a wall separating us from the world.
It's the continuous living thread that connects us to all life, including the deepest parts of yourself.
Use this perspective. Share this deep dive with someone who feels trapped by their habits, who needs that reminder that if a single-celled organism can learn and adapt, they certainly can too.
The goal isn't just intellectual understanding. It's about encouraging a more responsible, a more humble, and a more intentional interaction with that immense living world, both inside and outside of us. That's the real power of the continuous mind.